Welcome back to Room 237. I'm back with another review from the sort of height or heyday or boom of the torture porn genre of horror between 2004, 2011, 12-ish. And this was actually kind of different because I know mostly, mostly speaking, torture porn, apart from being sort of an extension or sort of next step up from both slasher and splatter, or both put together. Most torture porn was widely released. They were major studio films. But there were some that were lower budget, or I shouldn't say lower budget, because a lot of them were, but more so closer to independent, didn't have as wide releases. And this is actually one that kind of blends both torture porn and the sort of teen slasher genre. I wouldn't really call this a Renaissance slasher because it doesn't really evoke anything from the 80s. It does feel more like the mid to late 90s, early 2000s teen slashers than it does an 80s or Renaissance slasher. But it does have plenty of torture in it as well, done in the style of, the torture porn films of the time. Even a lot of the color saturation and tone of the film is a lot like the torture porn films of the time. And it's from 2007, which was still around the height of the genre. And it is Scar 3D, which I think it's also just known as Scar when you watch it in 2D. Now, this is one that was given to me from a friend of mine, as Teresa's was. When I got it from him, it didn't have the glasses it came with, so I've always watched this in 2D. And I've always liked this film. Surprisingly, this has a 0% on Rotten Tomatoes, which I do not understand. I mean, I see some films that are just downright terrible that still have anywhere in the teens, 20s, or 30%. And it's not that it doesn't have any reviews. There's 18 reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, but it still has a 0, calling it unoriginal, witless. And sure, that might be the case. It's not a very original film, but I at the very least found it interesting or entertaining. Now, the only thing I can say about cast and crew is that it does have a decent cast. Crew-wise, I mean, made by a bunch of people I can't click on. Like, directed by Jed Weintraub. Written by Zach Ford. Toshiaki Ozawa did the cinematography. Roger Neal did the music. He's the only one I can click on. Don't Think Twice, Beginners, King of the Hill. Not the opening, but what else has he scored? Lots of TV shows. Nothing else I've really recognized. But he scored with people like Roman Coppola, Gus Van Sant. So he does have a decent career. But the cast, the lead is Angela Bettis, who I've always liked. She played Carrie in the 2002 TV version. She was in the remake of Toolbox Murders. She had a small role in season 5 of Dexter. I know there's more that she's been in, but on top of my head, I've always liked Angela Bettis. Kirby Bliss Blanton, who was the vegan from Green Inferno, which I always think is the girl from Teeth, but it's not. Devin Gray, who was teenage Dexter in the first 2 or 3 seasons, at least 2 seasons. Christopher Titus, yes, the stand-up comedian, which I haven't seen a stand-up in quite a while, but I used to watch him a lot, and I do like Christopher Titus's comedy. He does a good job in this. Ben Cotton, who looks familiar. I clicked on I clicked on to see what else he's been in, and I haven't seen anything other than a role in Slither, which I don't remember who he was in Slither. Yeah, mostly TV. Yeah, I haven't seen anything else he's been in. Uh, he kind of looks like the Irish guy from the first Austin Powers, but it's not him. Uh, Brandon J. McLaren, and yeah, that so a pretty decent cast. Even ones who I don't know who they are, like a lot of the side characters, they all do fine. The acting is one of the stronger points of the film, especially by Bettis. I would say Kirby Bliss Blanton is better in this than she is in the Green Inferno. The only thing I would have, as far as acting goes, is both killers, because there's the flashback original killer and then the reveal at the end, which, I mean, you could probably tell going into it. It's yeah, I'm just gonna say both killers. Spoiler alert, but they do have a good presence, and I do buy them as these killers. But the only thing that kind of goes over the top is when they put out the arrogance, like the taunting. That's when it kind of goes over the top. Ben Cotton does have a good presence as this torturing serial killer. Uh, the second killer at the end, the copycat, I buy him as well, but he's even more over the top with the arrogance and the taunting. But the story is of Angela Bettis. When she was 17, she survived this horrific ordeal where her and her best friend, they were out in the cemetery smoking. She slipped, scraped her knee. The mortician brought them inside to help clean it, and he chloroformed them both, brought them down to the morgue, and started torturing them. And he was a serial killer, and his MO was this game where he'll torture both of them. Like, if he's torturing one, he'll stop if they say kill the other one. And then he'll keep the survivor alive for as many rounds as they last. Like, bring in someone else, and then, kind of like a tournament. But she's able to kill him, and then in present day, probably 15 years or so later, there's this new killer going around, taking out all these teenagers, and it seems to be the MO of this Ernie Bishop guy. That was the name of the first killer. And it's played out like, is it that guy? Did he really die? Has he come back somehow? Is it a copycat? And Angela Bettis is still, the whole thing is that the tagline is "Some wounds never heal." It's about like her PTSD and how she never overcame it. So when she sees these bodies piling up with the same kind of scars, she thinks either Bishop or someone like him has come back, and that's the movie. Christopher Titus plays a cop who's also her brother. His wife recently passed away. Kirby Bliss Blanton is Christopher Titus' daughter. And Devin Gray, young Dexter, plays her love interest. And it's her group of friends that are being killed off. And Angela Bettis' character, Joan, her backstory with Bishop is told through a series of flashbacks. They almost tell their own short story, just broken up throughout the film. Which, the transitions into the flashbacks are loud as shit, I will say that. But, and that's really the only torture and violence we get, because all the other deaths in the film are pretty much off-screen. We just kind of get the idea that they're missing or someone finds their bodies. So we don't actually see what happens to them. And I'm guessing that's because they want to keep the identity of the killer a secret up until the end. And I guess the best way to do that is to just not show it, which is fine. I would say some of the writing is a bit underdeveloped. Um, I mean, I get Joan's plight and everything she's going through, but and yeah, it is a copycat. It is kind of obvious who the copycat is. They do try to set it up that is a couple different characters, but I don't think it does a terribly good job with that. Uh, it is fairly obvious who it is going to be. But, I was fine with just the torture being in those flashbacks. And being a 3D film, it makes me think of, like, the My Bloody Valentine remake, which was shot in 3D. And a lot of the deaths were CGI, so that, they could do the 3D properly, I would imagine. But there's really not a lot of super noticeable, if any, CGI in this as far as the blood and gore goes. And also, one thing I appreciated is that the methods of torture are not over the top. It's not like these big implements like a chainsaw or something, or these big contraptions. It's actually very subtle. Like, in one flashback, we see that young Joan gets, like, Bishop has, like, a staple gun, and he just, like, goes down her side a bunch of times. Stuff like that, or just, like, cutting with a scalpel, or cutting out her friend's tongue. Or, like, her friend, whose legs are all cut up, he just kind of, like, dumps alcohol all over her. So it's not this crazy, over-the-top kind of torture, like Saw or something, which I thought can be more effective, and I thought it was. You can go subtle with torture, especially if the gore effects are good, which it was. So yeah, you get, there's two couples, so 4, and then I think 2 other people end up being killed / found, because again, we don't see them actually being killed, which I thought was an interesting choice. But, Joan thinks it's either Bishop or a copycat, but it all just looks like her. I think people think she's kind of crazy anyway, because she looks traumatized. She even goes to the funeral home at one point, because she tells the cops, like, well, did you search the funeral home? They say yes. She goes there, I guess for her own satisfaction and closure, but when she gets there, she hears screaming. And then she walks in the room, and they're screaming over a PA system, and there's a tour. It's now an Ernie Bishop museum. And of course, that pisses her off. Even the owner of the funeral home says, like, people are obsessed with serial killers. I mean, I bought all the stuff off the estate, and yeah, I just thought it'd be something fun for people to do. I don't know if that was like a setup for a red herring. Maybe. Another one is Devin Gray's dad, who we get the idea is, he's a decorated military vet who, Olympia is Kirby Blanton's name, which I kept thinking it was Olivia, but I guess it's Olympia. She goes to his house, then goes downstairs to use the bathroom, and the dad's just sitting in the bathroom in the dark, and he doesn't really talk. He's always, like, cold, staring. I think he was a setup for a red herring. But yeah, I mean, there's not really a whole lot to talk about story-wise. And then, Christopher Titus is killed in his own home, so they think it's Joan. They arrest her. She's able to escape because Devin Gray comes in saying that Olympia is missing and he wants to find her. So, he was able to steal the keys off the guard, because there's this thing he does in the beginning where when he first meets Olympia, where he like bumps into her and takes her phone out of her pocket. It like shows her that it was a trick. So and so Joan breaks out of the precinct with the guard's gun, and then it just cuts straight cut to her outside the funeral home. Like, she's held for not only killing her brother, but also a police officer, and is now the main suspect in this string of murders, and she was somehow able to get through the precinct with the pistol. I guess I'll say spoilers here, but it's not a very well-known film. It's not one anybody talks about at all. And yeah, the reveal of who the killer is, it is pretty obvious, especially if you've seen a lot of film, like a lot of gialli or mysteries. You can tell who's a red herring setup and probably who the killer is. And I would say some of it's kind of rushed and underdeveloped. I mean, we don't have to see her trying to get through the precinct, but it seems like there was a lot of stuff that they just kind of cut out. It's kind of, well, we don't really need to see it. Let's just get to the point. Which, I mean, it's only 78 minutes, so it's also a very short film. So, and actually, before I get to spoilers, so it's not the most original. I'm sure some people will be mad that we don't see any of the murders or tortures. The only torturing we see would actually be during her flashback, or flashbacks, and the climax when Joan finds where the killer is with Olympia and her best friend. But it's still fairly well made. I mean, there's not a whole lot I could say about it. It's not badly made. I mean, there were a couple parts like with the direction where, you know, Joan gets knocked out when she gets to where the killer is, and then she's handcuffed to a pipe while Olympia and her friend are on these tables. And the killer's like bent over to look at Olympia, but then stands up, so like from here up is at a frame, and he says a line to Joan. You would think the camera would pan up or it'd be a wider shot. It just kind of looked awkward. And I don't think there was a whole lot of scenes like that, but it was just one that I noticed. So not enough to say that the direction was flawed, but you know, there was just a couple scenes. And then there's the coloring, which I did like the saturated, very bright look of the flashbacks. You know, think of like the first Saw movie, just like that colorization and how bright that bathroom was. That's kind of how it looked in the flashbacks. But then when you get to that climax with the final torture scene and the killer reveal, when there's like, it's really dark, and it gets to the point where, and I mean, I was looking at my TV perfectly flat, because at first I thought maybe the TV was turned, because it looks like when you look at a screen sideways or like looking up at it, and it almost looks like a negative. Like, I don't know if you would call it saturated or overdone or what, but the colors are very much like that. And then when the killer is killed, it just goes into like this sort of yellow tint, which I'm not quite sure what that was about. But I see there was some effort there to do something. It didn't detract from the film, but it didn't quite add anything either. But anyway, spoilers for who the killer is for those who are interested. It's Paul, Devin Gray, the love interest, which is fitting. He played young Dexter, so, and his motive is pretty much what the guy said at the funeral home. People are obsessed with serial killers. But it didn't really give any hints to that's what Paul's deal was. I mean, I guess the only hint was that trick of how he steals phones and the guards' keys out of pockets. I mean, it didn't really go into. There weren't really any hints that he's really into true crime or, killers or history like that or anything. And basically, he feels like he was mistreated, ignored, sort of, you a bottom of the pecking order at school, just angry at being the popular guy, and really admired Bishop and his game. And he talks about, who sold out who and who lasted the longest between, everyone that he already had. Angela Bettis is able to, because he breaks a bottle near her, so she cuts her thumb. I don't know if she cuts it off, but when she cuts it enough so that when she slips the handcuffs through, it does rip her thumb off. I don't know if you can do that with bottle glass, but and yeah, is able to stop. Well, she takes the guard's pistol, shoots Paul. She goes to undo Olympia, and then Paul stabs her in the leg, but then Olympia grabs a sawzall and just cuts him down the head. That's when it turns into that yellow tint, that yellow lighting. But the camera holds on her. It doesn't really show him. I don't know if it's for budgetary reasons or what, but you do see the aftermath. Yeah, as far as budget goes, this was made for $4 million and it grossed $4.9 million, so this was considered a failure. I don't remember this coming out at all, so maybe it was because of marketing, maybe poor reviews at festivals, because it did premiere at festivals first. I'm not really sure. But the things he does, Paul does, while Olympia and her best friend are there, and Joan is handcuffed watching, is he cuts Olympia's forehead. He super glues or tapes a latex glove around her best friend's mouth and nose, so we just kind of see her suffocate. And yeah, as far as acting goes, I mean, I do kind of buy him as a teen copycat killer. But yeah, when he's doing his taunting and his arrogance, I will say that's a little over the top. He is kind of well, yeah, I guess so. I would say Ben Cotton as Bishop had more of a presence. It was more believable as a killer, but he was kind of the same way. When he's cutting the friend's tongue out, he's I heard you had a lovely singing voice. Almost going into Joker territory. Not laughing, but... And then it ends with Joan and Olympia. They're both in the hospital. There's a jump scare dream fake out where it looks like a hand behind a pillow grabs Olympia. And it ends with her saying, because she has these nightmares every time she closes her eyes, she says, "It never goes away, does it?" That's when Joan says, "No, it doesn't." So Olympia's going to live a lifelong of trauma like Joan did. And yeah, again, it's not the most original torture film or slasher. It is very predictable. Might not be the most different or excitingly directed. There wasn't really anything score-wise I could say about it. The acting I thought was either fine or passable to pretty good. I mean, Angela Bettis was really good as always. Christopher Titus was good. Everyone else, even the lesser characters who get killed off, I thought they did fine. The only thing acting-wise would be both Cotton and Gray tend to go a little over the top, but it was fine. Probably the most important thing would be the blood and gore effects. And again, it doesn't bother me that we don't see the killings, like the present day killings. We just see the aftermath of the bodies. That didn't bother me. I mean, I'm guessing it was because they wanted to keep the identity of the killer a secret. And where this is like prolonged torture, where they have to speak. And they all know who Paul is. It probably would have just been easier to not show it. And it's kind of more effective because then our imaginations could take over. But we do get plenty of our fill with Joan's flashbacks with Bishop. And again, it's not crazy like power tool torture or anything. It is, like a staple gun or a scalpel or something like that. Alcohol on wounds. Subtle but effective. Oh yeah, she kills. The way she does kill Bishop kind of reminded me of a Mortuary, which is a much better movie than this, where she just stabs Bishop with a trocar and it drains all his blood. So yeah, while it might not be the most original and there's nothing great I could say about it other than the blood and gore effects and some of the acting, it was still entertaining enough. It was still intriguing enough to want to see what happened. So I wouldn't call this a bad movie at all. It's just kind of there. It's definitely not 0% Rotten Tomatoes worthy. Definitely not at all. I mean, I would call it a 50% movie because it's just kind of there. But, yeah. Not too much I can say about it, even though it went on for 26, almost 27 minutes anyway. But that is Scar or Scar 3D. Yeah, kind of a mix of torture porn and slasher. I guess not really independent, but not a major release, kind of in between. Box office failure. But yeah, I like it. So thank you for watching.